Hey everyone, great to have you watching this morning. We're continuing our series on the armour of God, looking at how we can stand firm and win in the Christian life. And just reminded me, as I was about to come out and film this, I stopped by my kitchen and I saw something on the kitchen bench. And last year we had the good fortune to go to Rome and a few other places, and in Rome one of my sons wanted to buy a knick-knack and buy a souvenir, and we went past this trashy souvenir shop and he really wanted a bobblehead. Now, if you know what a bobblehead is, it's something with a bobbly head. And there was various bobbleheads. You could buy a Pope bobblehead, you could buy a Jesus bobblehead. Kind of didn't really want one of those. So we went for something a bit more Italian, Roman. So we got actually a Roman soldier. Here he is, little fella, bobblehead, see? And he's got all the armour on. And I thought, why haven't I been using Mr. Bobblehead in this series? So today we're going to use Mr. Bobblehead as part of our talk. And today we're talking about the shield of faith, right there, big shield for Mr. Bobblehead. So I'm glad we bought that, Joe, in Rome. Anyway, just to recap, in case you haven't been watching and wondering what the heck I'm talking about, we were talking about this idea that we are in a spiritual battle. That's our reality. And in this spiritual battle, it plays out between God and the devil. It plays out in our lives. It plays out in our world. It plays out in our life together. It plays out in a big cosmic sense. There's a spiritual battle going on between God and the devil, between good and evil, between good in us and evil in us, and all that sort of thing. There's a spiritual battle and we're in it, and we sometimes forget that, and we need to be aware and need to be prepared. Our enemy is the devil and all the rulers of darkness and the powerful forces of evil that are in our world, and we've seen so many of those, evidence of so many of those in the last little while. And we said the devil is a schemer. He's sometimes evil, he's right in your face. Other times he's more subtle and he tricks us and he schemes and he twists things and he deceives us and he influences us and he distracts us and he blocks us and he blinds us from the truth, all those sorts of things, and he divides people. That's his strategy. He does whatever he can to bring us down and to bring down what is good in our world. And it makes us ineffective when we fall for his traps. But there's some good news. We've said three things. The war is already over. Jesus already won through his life and death and resurrection. Victory is assured. The war is over. There's some skirmishes and battles that we're in, but the war and the outcome is already determined. Jesus is Lord of all. Jesus is the highest ruler there is in all of creation, all of the world. Ephesians 1:21 says, Paul says, there's no other authority greater than Jesus. So we're on the winning side. We have him as our the one we follow. There's no one greater than him. We can take great comfort in that. And the Christian life is centered not on this warfare and worry and all that, but on joyful life, positive life in the Spirit. That's what the New Testament emphasizes. It's actually about living our life in the Spirit as we go about life and about this battle that we're in. And our responsibility is twofold. To stand strong in the Lord, stand strong in our relationship with God through the Spirit and through living his way. And secondly, to put on the full armour of God. And that's what this passage is talking about. It's a metaphor for how we can stand firm in this Christian life and Christian battle. Today we're up to our fourth piece of armour. We've done the belt of truth, we've done the breastplate of righteousness, we've done the boots of peace, and today we're talking about the shield of faith. So here's my little man to help me with that shield of faith. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 14, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Paul's using a metaphor here, and he's referring actually to that big rectangular shield that Roman soldiers used in battle, and it's only a little here, but it's a big comparison to their body. It was over probably about 1.2 meters long and probably about this wide, 75-80 centimeters wide, and it was made of two wooden panels stuck together and then covered with leather hide. So it was quite thick and it was strong, and that's what the Roman soldiers carried into battle with them. Our simple main point for today is that with regards to that shield of faith is this: we must live by faith. We must live by faith. That's how we're called to live and to fight. As Christians, we're people of faith. We come to God through faith, and we have to live by faith and take up that shield as we go about our life. We've got to take it up and live with it and fight with it as we move forward in faith. Today I want to look at three questions that kind of help us unpack this. First one is, what is faith? Second one is, why do we need to take up the shield of faith? And the third one is, how can we actually do that? How can we take up the shield of faith? So firstly, what is faith? Hebrews chapter 11 is a passage that is well known for faith. And it says this, the first verse, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So faith involves a confidence and assurance of things that we can't 100% prove or guarantee. But that doesn't mean that faith is blind or illogical or just a big leap in the dark. To have faith in something or someone is to say that there's enough evidence for me to put my trust in that thing or that person. It's not an illogical jump. So on the basis of reasonable, so on weighing the evidence, we actually place our trust in that. There's enough evidence to give us confidence or assurance. It's not about 100%, it's about actually enough to us to be reasonable and put our trust in it. And the Christian faith is no different. It's not blind faith, it's evidenced faith. It's faith that steps out off a platform of historical evidence about the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, amongst other things of which there's great historical evidence. It's evidence from natural theology, creation, and all the things that we see around us and reveal God to us. It's evidence from philosophical reasons like the meaning of life and morality and where that comes from, beauty and love, why are they in our universe, those sorts of questions. And then there's experiential evidence, the evidence of our own experiences with God and interactions with spiritual realities, and actually our own evidence of walking Jesus' way and realizing it's true and it actually is real. All these things give us evidence to have a sense of assurance and confidence from. So it's not blind faith, it's evidenced faith is what we have as Christians. On the basis of the evidence that we have come to accumulate and believe in, we take a step of trust and faith and put our trust in God and base our lives on Him. You know, for me, evidence matters. I'm a person of faith, but I'm not a person who believes in anything. You know, you will not get me to believe in, sorry kids, Santa Claus or Easter Bunny, or you won't get me to put my faith and base my life on Buddha or on the atheist worldview, because I don't have enough faith, having looked at some of the evidence for that, to believe it. So evidence matters to me. It's got to stack up. So that's why, actually, a big part of why I'm a Christian. I actually think it stacks up, and I encourage you to pursue that if you want to, if you're not sure about that. And the beautiful part about it too is actually I realise as I think about this, and I've heard other people talk about it, you don't actually have to have 100% certainty to take a step of faith. You don't have to know everything about God. You don't have to believe everything fully. You just have to believe this is reasonable. I've weighed it up. I believe this is true, and take a step of faith, and God will meet you there. That's a really important thing. You don't have to have it all sorted out, have all your questions answered, to take a step of faith and come and move towards Jesus. And so that's a really cool thing. Christian faith is evidenced faith. Christian faith is lived faith. It incorporates belief in certain things in our head, but it's only truly known as it's lived out and becomes reality. James chapter 2 talked about this in our weekly devotions. It says, faith without living and being lived out is dead. It's not real faith. It doesn't count for anything if it doesn't produce a life of love and goodness. Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter of faith, if you look through the list of examples of the faith, they're all people who did something. By faith, Abraham left his country. By faith, Moses chose to be identified with his people. By faith, they all did something. They didn't just, by faith, they thought something. Their faith and their confidence moved them to do something. So faith involves trust and belief worked out over our lifetime in action. Galatians 5 verse 6, one of my kind of favourite simple little verses to remember, says, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Faith has to express itself, has to have an outlet through love. Wonderful thing. So Christian faith is evidenced faith, Christian faith is lived faith, and Christian faith is faithful faith. Now, what do I mean by that? Sounds like a sort of a tongue tie. But it's interesting that the word for faith in the New Testament is, in the Greek sort of word, it's a word called pistis, which sounds a bit weird. But actually, if you look up what it means faith/faithfulness. doesn't just mean a belief. It actually means a belief over time that's put into practice. And so even though our English Bibles often just say faith, very often there's a lot of argument that they should actually say faithfulness instead, because that's a different concept. So there's both an initial and an ongoing concept to faith, aspect to it. Involves trust and belief worked out over time as loyalty and allegiance over the long haul. So faith is commitment and belief that sticks, or confidence that commits, you might say. Trust and allegiance. It's a faith element of faithfulness to it that works out over time. So in the Christian life, this is the sort of faith we put in Jesus or in God. We come to faith, God, by that sort of faith, evidence faith, with lived faith, and with faithful faith that sticks and follows him by ongoing trust and allegiance. So that's kind of what faith is. That's how we think of it. Second thing is, why must we take up faith as a shield? Why does it matter? Well, firstly, to protect ourselves. In verse 16 he says, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. It's war imagery. And what used to happen is that the Roman soldiers would actually wet this leather hide on the outside of their shield before they went into battle, make it really damp, because enemies would shoot fiery arrows, and when they hit them they would be extinguished. So it was a way of extinguishing the attacks that came to them. That's the imagery he's using. So in a strong faith, if we have a strong faith that knows the truth about God and about his love and his power and his grace, it knows that his way is best, and that the alternatives are weaker than the Christian alternative. It has seen God come through and prayers been answered. All these elements of strong faith are able to extinguish attacks that come to us, attacks of fear and doubt and despair and temptation and greed and distraction, all that sort of thing. And they do come. But a strong faith can extinguish that and put those things out and allow us to stand firm and be protected. You know, it matters that we actually take up the shield of faith and live by faith, because there are all sorts of fiery arrows in our society through our culture and media and through so many avenues where arrows are being shot at us from all sorts of directions. And it's important that we have that shield of faith strong and dampened and wet, ready to extinguish those in our lives. Our shield of faith protects us from those things, Paul says. But secondly, really interestingly, we must take up the shield of faith to protect each other. You know, it's interesting that if you look at any of the sort of history books or whatever, the commentaries, they say that the Roman soldiers would march together side by side in formation. So that big rectangular shield would be right next to the next person, and it would form a wall. And not only that, the second row back, they'd put them on top. So it was like this cover. They'd be like this shield, one huge big shield of faith, and they could march forward, and they were impenetrable. No one could get through. They would put the arrows out, and they couldn't be stopped when they were side by side. There was no weak spots when they were marched side by side with their shields next to each other. The individual soldier was better protected when he stood side by side with his other soldiers, when he was in formation, and he could provide protection to his fellow soldiers when they stood side by side together. Yeah, that's a powerful analogy, really, I think, for a community of faith, as we are called to take up a shield of faith. We are stronger when we stand together in faith, in formation, side by side, together. It's a really powerful thing. You know, so it matters to my faith whether you are standing side by side with me with your faith, and vice versa. Your faith encourages me. Your faith protects me from falling. Your faith is an example to me and strengthens my faith, and hopefully vice versa. It actually matters whether each person is in formation, is part of the community of faith and standing and marching together. It's more than an individual pursuit, being me and God, or me fighting my battle on my own. We are stronger in formation. And so we must take up the shield of faith together and live it out together in formation. Third thing, how do we take up the shield of faith? How do we live by faith? Well, two ideas here. By standing in the faith and by strengthening our faith. Standing in the faith and strengthening our faith. We can stand in faith by fixing our eyes on Jesus. Hebrews 12, which comes after 11, says, therefore, having mentioned all those people of faith, says, therefore, since we're surrounded by so many people of faith, let us run the race marked out for us with perseverance. Let us throw off all the things that entangle us, and let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. It's like the motivation point. It's like, I'm going to run with my eyes on the goal, on Jesus, the one I'm going to follow. It's a really powerful image. 2 Corinthians 4:18, Paul says, we're not tempted to quit, even though life is difficult. He says, for we fix our eyes on not on what we can see, but what is on unseen realities, on Jesus and his truth. How do we do that? Well, one way to fix our eyes on Jesus is to just read bits of the gospel fairly regularly, and feeds our minds and our spiritual eyes, if you like, on Jesus. Another thing is to do something really practical and maybe wear one of those wristbands that we have at church, love God, love others, from words of Jesus, or what would Jesus do, or whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Recently some of us have watched that mini-series, The Chosen, and it's just drawn us to Jesus. And I just encourage you to do that. It's free if you don't want to donate. And it just makes Jesus compelling. And so there are all sorts of things we can do to fix our eyes on Jesus to help us stand firm in the faith. And we stand firm in the faith by praying in faith. We stand in prayer. We fight in prayer. We stand firm by praying alone and together, and by trusting and moving forward and living out our faith. We've already talked about that in everyday situations. As I said before, in Hebrews 11, they all did something. They all moved forward in faith. Every time we in faith make a good choice, live out a loving action, stand up for what's right, say some encouraging words to someone, we're living out the faith. That's what we're doing. It's a powerful thing. So we stand firm in faith by doing those things, and we strengthen our faith. I don't know if you realise this, but your faith can grow. It says in Scripture in Colossians 2, 6 and 7, just as you received Christ Jesus Lord by faith, continue in him, rooted, built up, strengthened in the faith. Strengthened in the faith. 2 Thessalonians 1, 3, Paul says, we thank God because your faith is growing more and more. In the Gospels, Jesus talked about, you have little faith, and I've never seen such great faith. Where is your faith? It's like it's a thing that can be different sizes, sort of thing. And we strengthen our faith, like we strengthen most things, by exercising it. That's how you get your big guns. You exercise, you strengthen it, and you do it regularly. You have a habit and pattern for that, a training regime. Except our training is in real life by exercising our faith, by living out our faith and serving together and trusting, seeing God come through. When you see God come through or answer prayer, it builds spiritual muscle and faith muscle in your life that you wouldn't get if you didn't step out and see him come through. We exercise our faith. We share stories. When I hear about how God's worked in your life, that encourages my faith, and vice versa. We share our stories of faith, and we read other stories of faith. I've been so encouraged in my own life reading biographies of people's lives of faith. Wow, it fires you up to live more like that, to be a person of faith. And we strengthen our faith by building our foundation, making sure our shield is strong, the best wood we can get, the best leather we can get. By building our foundation, by increasing our knowledge and understanding of who God is and the truth of the faith, however we want to do that. 2 Timothy 1 verse 12, I said, I think last week, last time I spoke, this is Paul's last letter. And he says to Timothy, I know who I have believed, and I'm persuaded, I'm convinced that he's able to look after me. Convinced, that's the faith. Faith is being convinced of things you can't be 100% certain of. We build our foundation. He knows. There's great simple ways to do this. You can read, listen. I say this so often, but I've come across a podcast by Australian guy John Dixon. It's just called Undeceptions. You go on podcast and search it. It's really good because it's just it's kind of entertaining. It's kind of a bit intellectual at times, but it's kind of really meant for everyday people, and just by listening to it, just various topics, just answering questions about faith, shoring up the evidence, giving confidence to me as I listen to that. Yes, our faith is solid. There is evidence. Why not do something like that? Why not just subscribe and listen to that in the car, or when you go for a walk, or occasionally? It only comes out like once a week. Really practical thing you could do, to listen to something like that, or do whatever you like. But we need to build our foundation and build our faith. Faith is indispensable. That's what I've come to realise. Faith is indispensable to the Christian life and the spiritual battle. We must take up our shield of faith. We have to. We can't live effectively as Christians without that. We have to live by faith. So I encourage you to put your faith in Jesus if you've never done that. And the good thing is, you don't have to be 100% certain to take a step of faith and to place your faith in Jesus. You just need to weigh up the evidence and think, this is reasonable. I actually think I could commit myself to this. And take a step, and God will meet you there. So I encourage you to do that if you want to do that. And I'd encourage all of us to think about whether we're standing in formation. Because I don't want to be the weak link in our formation. I don't want to be the one where there's a hole. Because I don't want to be responsible for injury to you. But I don't want you to be the weak link for the rest of us either. So I just encourage you to think, are you standing in formation? Because it matters to all of us how each other is doing in the faith. And I encourage you to stand in the faith. Maybe you're facing something right now where you need faith. I encourage you to stand in it. Move forward in faith, in prayer, with others by your side. Grab some people if you need them. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Find a way to fix your eyes on Jesus every day. Simple thing that works for you. And I encourage you to strengthen your faith, to exercise it, to build your foundation, build your knowledge, to have that strong shield of faith. Let's be people of faith who walk by faith. We must live by faith. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for today. Thank you for the truth of this message, that we need to live by faith. Help us to live by faith, I pray. I just pray for anyone who's watching who wants to take a step of faith for the first time, or again, or in a situation. I just pray you'd encourage them to do that, to actually have the confidence and the assurance. Would you give them that by your Spirit, and help them to take the step they need to take, I pray. And if you want to take a step, whatever that is, maybe just stop and tell God what you're going to do in faith. Lord, help us to live out our lives of faith. Help us to strengthen our faith and be ready, and help us to stand in formation as a church. As we come back to church together, Lord, would you bring us back strong, I pray. In your name, just commit ourselves to you. Amen.